She wasn't supposed to speak, so when the barefoot maid stepped between the council and the kneeling alpha, the entire hall froze. Laughter died, guards reached for blades, and the man everyone had just humiliated finally moved. The question was no longer whether she'd saved him, but who would die first. The ceremonial hall reeked of ambition and old blood. Ragnar Vale knelt on marble so cold it burned, his jaw locked tight as laughter echoed off stone walls, tasting like iron on his tongue, not from injury, but from the violence he was forcing himself not to unleash. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to rise, to let the storm he'd buried claw its way free and remind these perfumed fools what an alpha truly was. Not yet, the voice of survival whispered. Not here. They can't know. So he stayed perfectly still while Lord Corrigan's son spat near his boots. Look at him, the young lord sneered. The great disgrace himself. My father says you used to lead men. Now you can't even lift your eyes. Ragnar kept his gaze on the crack in the marble. The young lord was right about one thing. He had led men. The northern clans had once followed him through fire because they knew Storm Alpha never broke. And then your own blood called you traitor. His wolf snarled. They stripped your name. Scattered your pack. Made you this. The beast inside him was a living thing of shadow and fury, pacing the cage of his restraint. It wanted to flood the hall with enough alpha pressure to drop every warrior to their knees and make the nobles choke on their own contempt. Instead, Ragnar tasted iron and kept his breathing even. Pathetic, Corrigan's son declared. The Storm Alpha, they called you. Now you're just a stray dog begging for scraps. The words hit exactly where they were meant to, because his own pack had called him weak before they betrayed him. Before the council twisted the story. Before everything burned. He'd had to be weak. Survival depended on it. A deep, resonant chime rang through the hall, the ceremonial bells announcing the final phase of judgment. Lord Corrigan ascended the dais. The council calls all witnesses. Let the ceremony of worth reach its conclusion. This was it. Public condemnation disguised as justice. Ragnar didn't know what terrified him more. The exile they were about to pronounce, or the possibility that this time, the Storm Alpha would finally answer. The sacred hall was a cathedral of cruelty dressed in silk. Clara moved through it like smoke, her bare feet silent on polished stone. Don't be noticed, her mind chanted. Noticed is dangerous. She polished a silver chalice, eyes downcast but missing nothing. The noble ladies clustered by the hearth, their laughter sharp enough to cut. Can you believe they're letting that into the ceremony? Lady Morwen said. A drifter with no name, no pack. The council should have cast him out. Clara risked a glance across the hall. Ragnar Vale knelt in the center of the floor, head bowed, shoulders bent. But the guards kept their distance, instinctively, as if their bodies recognized a threat their minds couldn't name. And when Corrigan's son had spat near his boots, Clara had seen the way Ragnar's fingers pressed into the marble hard enough to whiten his knuckles. That wasn't a weakness. That was a man holding back an avalanche. They saw a broken drifter. She saw a wolf forced into a cage. You see it because you know what it looks like, a voice whispered. You've worn the same mask for years. The memory hit, smoke and screaming, the smell of burning timber and blood. She'd been 9, hidden in a root cellar while the council's forces purged her village. Her mother had called it murder before the blade found her throat. Clara had survived by learning to disappear. Maybe that's why she recognized another ghost when she saw one. Let the final judgment commence, Lord Corrigan announced. As the arbiter raised his staff and called Ragnar forward, Clara's gaze drifted back to the man kneeling on cold marble. And for the first time in 8 years, she felt something other than numb emptiness. Recognition. Dangerous, undeniable recognition. Ragnar Vale, the High Arbiter announced. Step forward to receive the council's judgment. Ragnar rose slowly. The ceremonial floor stretched before him like an arena, and 1,000 pairs of eyes descended with the weight of stones. His goal was brutally simple. Endure. Breathe. Do not let the storm break free. Who speaks for this man? The arbiter called. Who claims kinship, honor, or worth on his behalf? Silence. Profound, echoing silence. Who stands as witness to his character? More silence. Nervous laughter rippled through the nobles. Then let it be known, the arbiter continued, raising the ceremonial staff, that Ragnar Vale stands alone. Without pack. Without honor. Without mercy from any of you. Every head turned. Clara stood near the servant's alcove, her hand raised, trembling but visible. A servant had no right to speak, especially not here. For a heartbeat the entire hall held its breath. Then chaos erupted. A maid. How dare she? Lord Corrigan's face flushed crimson. Silence that girl. But Clara was already moving. Her bare feet carried her forward, past the frozen nobles, past the shocked guards. She stopped 3 paces in front of Ragnar and met his eyes for the first time. There was no pity in her gaze. No disgust. No fear. Recognition. Understanding. And beneath it all a quiet, desperate defiance that mirrored his own. This ceremony is a lie, Clara said, her voice shaking but clear. The High Arbiter slammed his staff. Seize her. A guard moved toward Clara, hand reaching for her arm. And Ragnar finally moved. He didn't attack. He didn't raise his hand. He simply stood. The marble beneath his feet fractured with a sharp crack. The air pressure shifted, dropped, became suffocating. Ragnar's suppressed alpha aura flooded outward like a dam breaking. An overwhelming presence that forced every wolf in the vicinity to instinctively bare their necks. The guard dropped to one knee. His hand fell away from Clara as if burned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That power. No broken man moves like that. Ragnar stood between Clara and the council, shoulders no longer hunched, head no longer bowed. He still wore the coarse clothing of a drifter. He still said nothing. But everything had changed. The Storm Alpha was awake. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comment where you are watching from. We are a small growing channel. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. What did you just do? Clara's heart hammered. Her body had moved on instinct, but now she stood alone in the terrifying spotlight of 1,000 hostile eyes. The whispers came like serpents. A servant spoke at the ceremony. She's lost her mind. Lord Corrigan's face turned purple. You dare, a mere servant, disrupt the council's sacred judgment? Clara wanted to run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to flee. But then her gaze found Ragnar's again. The moment their eyes locked, the noise faded. His eyes had changed. They were no longer dull and defeated. They were storm gray and ancient, burning with power that made the air feel electric. She'd seen something in him that no one else had. And now he was seeing her. You've sealed your own fate, the arbiter hissed. But Clara couldn't look away. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Because the man they called broken and weak was rising to his full height. And the floor was cracking beneath his feet. The nobles would later say it happened too fast to follow. But Clara saw every second. She saw the way Ragnar's shoulders straightened, not with effort, but with the terrible ease of a man finally releasing a burden he'd carried too long. She saw the guard's eyes widen in primal recognition, as something ancient flooded the space between heartbeats. Most of all, she saw the exact moment Ragnar Vale stopped being the ghost everyone thought he was, and became the storm they'd all forgotten. 3 years earlier, before the betrayal, before the exile, before the silence, there had been another ceremony. 3 years earlier, Ragnar had stood on a different dais then, not as a prisoner but as a commander. The northern clans had gathered to hear him refuse the council's order. I will not slaughter civilians, he'd said, his voice carrying across a hall that had fallen deathly quiet. If that makes me a traitor, then I am proud to be one. They'd called him a coward, stripped his title, declared him enemy of the realm. And he'd let them, because the alternative was becoming the monster they wanted him to be. Now, kneeling in this hall with his head bowed and his power leashed, Ragnar wondered if that choice had been worth it. 3 years of humiliation. 3 years of biting his tongue while lesser men spat at his feet. 3 years of pretending to be weak while the beast inside him screamed for blood. The arbiter's voice droned on, listing his supposed crimes. The crowd murmured their agreement. Clara's interruption still echoed in the silence between his heartbeats. Without mercy from any of you. And something in those words had cracked the foundation of his restraint. She'd seen him. Not the broken drifter. Not the disgraced failure. Him. Ragnar Vale, the arbiter intoned, raising the ceremonial staff high. By the authority vested in the High Council, I hereby. Stop. The word wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Clara's voice cut through the hall like a blade through rotted silk, and every noble head turned toward the servants' alcove where she stood, one trembling hand raised. The arbiter's staff froze mid-arc. What? Who dares? I said stop. Clara stepped forward, her bare feet silent on polished stone. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, but her eyes burned with something Ragnar recognized instantly. Desperation. The kind that came from having nothing left to lose. The hall erupted. A servant speaks at ceremony? Throw her out. She's mad. Lord Corrigan surged to his feet, his face apoplectic. Silence that insolent girl before I have her whipped. But Clara kept walking. Past the frozen nobles. Past the guards too shocked to move. She walked straight toward Ragnar and planted herself between him and the council, her slight frame a barrier against an entire world of power and privilege. This ceremony is a lie, she said, her voice carrying despite its tremor. You call it judgment, but it's just cruelty pretending to be law. The arbiter's face contorted with rage. You dare, a maid. You dare question the council's authority? I dare question a ceremony that condemns a man without knowing his truth. Ragnar's breath caught. He'd expected pity, maybe even misguided sympathy. But this was something else entirely. She wasn't defending him out of kindness. She was challenging the entire system that had ground them both beneath its heel. Someone finally saw him. And she wasn't afraid. His control already fraying, pulled taut as a wire about to snap. Seize her, the arbiter commanded. Take her to the... Sir Aldrich, one of the council's knights, moved with brutal efficiency. His gauntlet hand reached for Clara's arm, fingers closing around her wrist. And Ragnar's restraint shattered. He didn't think, didn't plan, didn't calculate. He simply stood. The marble beneath his feet didn't crack. It exploded, spiderwebs of fractures racing outward from where he'd knelt. The air itself changed, pressure dropping so fast that nobles gasped and servants stumbled. Ragnar's suppressed alpha aura erupted outward like a dam breaking after 3 years of strain. Invisible, crushing, absolute. Sir Aldrich's hand fell away from Clara as if her skin had burned him. The knight dropped to one knee, his face going white. Around the hall, lesser wolves instinctively bared their throats. Guards staggered. Nobles clutched at their chests. Ragnar stood between Clara and the council, his shoulders square, his head finally lifted. He still wore the coarse clothing of a drifter. He still said nothing. But everything had changed. The whisper started like wine through dead leaves. That power. Did you feel? No, broken man. That's not. The arbiter's staff clattered to the stone floor. Because everyone in that hall suddenly understood the truth they'd been too blind to see. The Storm Alpha had never been broken. He'd been waiting. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then the High Arbiter's face twisted into something ugly. A smile that held no warmth, only vindication. He retrieved his staff from the floor with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving Ragnar. So, he said, his voice carrying across the frozen hall, the dog finally shows his teeth. Ragnar said nothing. He stood perfectly still, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the arbiter, while Clara trembled behind him. You want to know why we condemned him? The arbiter turned to address the crowd, his tone shifting into something theatrical. 3 years ago this man, this traitor, defied a direct order from the council. We commanded him to purge the rebel villages along the northern border. Civilians harboring insurgents. Traitors breeding more traitors. Clara's breath caught. Northern border. 3 years ago. But Ragnar Vale refused, the arbiter continued, venom dripping from every word. He claimed the council's order was unjust, that slaughtering civilians, even though sheltering our enemies, was beneath him. He abandoned his post, let the insurgents escape, and cost us hundreds of loyal soldiers in the resulting chaos. The nobles murmured their agreement. Some even nodded. But Clara's world had gone silent. Northern border. 3 years ago. The smell of smoke. The screams. Her mother's last words. Run, Clara. Hide and don't come out. The council declared him traitor, the arbiter said. Stripped his title. Dissolved his pack. We showed mercy by allowing him to live, and this is how he repays us. By disrupting our sacred ceremony with this display. Clara's hands had gone numb. Her vision blurred at the edges. The purge that killed her family, the soldiers who burned her village, who called them traitors, who murdered everyone she loved. Ragnar had refused that order. He hadn't failed to save them. He tried. The man condemned as a coward was the only reason any of them had survived. Why doesn't he speak? Someone called from the crowd. Why doesn't he defend himself? The arbiter's smile widened. Because he has nothing to say. Even he knows his crime is. He made a vow. Clara's voice cut through the hall stronger now. She stepped out from behind Ragnar, her fear replaced by something harder. Certainty. He won't speak to liars, she said, her eyes locked on the arbiter. He won't waste his voice on people who've already decided his guilt. Why would he? You never wanted justice. You wanted him erased. The arbiter's smile vanished. You overstep, girl. This was never a ceremony, Clara continued, her voice rising. It was an execution by humiliation. You wanted him broken publicly so no one would question when he disappeared. Silence her. Lord Corrigan roared. The arbiter's expression went cold. You've both made your choice. He raised his staff and slammed it against the stone floor 3 times, sharp, deliberate strikes that echoed like a death knell. Seize them. Both of them. The girl is an accomplice to treason. Guards surged forward. Clara heard the scrape of steel on leather as swords were drawn. But then she heard something else. A sound like wind chimes. Metallic. Deadly. She looked up. Hidden blades were descending from the ceiling, dozens of them suspended on near-invisible wires, dropping toward where she and Ragnar stood. The marble beneath their feet bore faint etchings she hadn't noticed before, marks that formed A. The blades resumed their descent. Ragnar moved. Not with rage. Not with the wild fury of a beast unleashed. He moved with the surgical precision of a war leader who'd commanded armies, every motion deliberate, every action calculated. He swept Clara behind him as the first blade fell. His hand rose and the air itself seemed to solidify. The blade stopped inches from his palm, vibrating against invisible resistance before snapping in half. The broken pieces clattered harmlessly to the marble. Kill them, the arbiter screamed. Kill them both. 10 guards charged from different directions. Ragnar didn't even turn. The marble beneath them erupted upward in jagged spikes, forcing them back. One guard stumbled. Ragnar was there in a breath, his fist connecting with the man's chest. Not to kill, but to stop. The guard flew backward, armor crumpling, and hit the far wall unconscious. A pillar to Ragnar's left cracked from foundation to ceiling, the sound like thunder in the enclosed space. Nobles shrieked and scattered as chunks of stone rained down. The ceremonial dais where the arbiter stood began to split, fissures racing across its surface. Run! Someone screamed. The hall is collapsing. But it wasn't the hall collapsing. It was Ragnar dismantling it with surgical precision, creating chaos to cover their escape while ensuring no one died. Every falling stone missed the fleeing nobles by inches. Every guard who charged him was disarmed and incapacitated, not killed. 2 knights rushed him simultaneously. Ragnar caught the first by the throat, not crushing, just holding, and used the man's momentum to swing him into his companion. Both collapsed in a tangle of armor and broken pride. "This is your restraint," Clara breathed, pressed against his back as he shielded her from falling debris. She felt his shoulders tense, felt the controlled violence radiating from him like heat from a forge. This wasn't even a fraction of what he could do. This was mercy wearing the mask of destruction. The High Arbiter stumbled down from the ruined dais, his ceremonial robes torn. "You're a monster," he spat. Ragnar's stormlit eyes fixed on him. Still he said nothing, because the man wasn't worth his voice. "My lord, we must retreat," a guard captain shouted, pulling at Lord Corrigan's sleeve. "We can't, he's too cowards," Corrigan roared. But even he was backing toward the exit, his face pale. The myth of Ragnar's weakness wasn't dying. It was being publicly executed. Clara saw the exact moment it happened, the instant the nobles stopped seeing a broken drifter and started seeing what he truly was. Fear replaced contempt. Respect replaced mockery. They fled not from a monster, but from an alpha who'd been pretending to be prey. "Clara." Ragnar's voice was quiet, meant only for her. "We need to move." She froze. After 3 years of silence, hearing him speak her name felt like a thunderclap in her chest. His voice was rough from disuse but steady. "Certain." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "I know." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. "That's why I'm asking you to run with me." He turned, his hand finding hers, and for the first time in 3 years, Ragnar Vale spoke loud enough for the hall to hear. "This ceremony is over." The remaining guards parted like water. Ragnar and Clara ran. Behind them, the great doors of the sacred hall burst open. Ahead, the narrow streets of the lower city beckoned, dark, winding, and far from the council's immediate reach. Alarm bells began to ring across the palace complex, their iron voices screaming betrayal and escape into the night. But Clara didn't feel like a fugitive. For the first time in 8 years, running didn't feel like fleeing. Felt like freedom. They plunged into the shadows between buildings, Ragnar's hand still clasped around hers, and the city swallowed them whole. Behind them, the sacred hall blazed with torchlight and chaos. The ceremony that was meant to erase Ragnar Vale had become the moment the realm would never forget him. And the maid who was meant to remain invisible had become the one person he refused to leave behind. The lower city smelled of smoke, sweat, and desperation. Clara's lungs burned as Ragnar pulled her through narrow alleyways that twisted like serpents between crumbling tenements. Her bare feet slapped against wet cobblestones. Behind them, the sound of pursuit echoed, boots shouted commands, the metallic scrape of drawn weapons. "There!" A voice cut through the darkness. "The traitor went east." Ragnar changed direction without breaking stride. His hand still clasped around Clara's wrist. Not pulling. Not dragging. Guiding. They burst into a merchant square lit by dying braziers. Clara's heart sank. 3 council enforcers blocked the far exit, professional killers in black leather, blades already drawn. "End of the road, Vale," the lead enforcer said, his smile cruel in the firelight. Ragnar released Clara's hand. "Close your eyes," he said quietly. She didn't. The enforcers attacked as one coordinated, lethal, efficient. Ragnar moved like liquid shadow. The first enforcer's throat opened before his blade fell. The second died with Ragnar's borrowed sword through his heart. No hesitation, no ceremony, just brutal efficiency. The third managed half a scream before Ragnar's hand closed around his skull and squeezed. It was over in 3 heartbeats. Ragnar stood among the bodies, his borrowed blade dripping red onto the cobblestones. He didn't look at them, didn't gloat, didn't even breathe hard. He turned to Clara, and his expression softened. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. This was the same man who'd shielded her in the hall. The same man who'd spoken her name like it mattered. But his hands were soaked in blood, and he'd killed 3 trained soldiers without breaking a sweat. "Come." He offered his clean hand. "We need to keep moving." Clara took it, and something shifted inside her. The nobles had called Ragnar a monster. They'd feared his power, his violence, his capacity for destruction. But standing here in the dim light of the lower city, Clara finally understood. Power wasn't cruelty. Power was just power. It was fear that made people cruel. Fear of losing control. Fear of being challenged. Fear of someone who refused to kneel. The council had killed hundreds through legal ceremonies and sanctioned purges. Deaths wrapped in ritual and justified by law. Ragnar had killed 3 men in the darkness to protect someone who'd stood up for him. Which was the real monster? "Why didn't you tell me to look away?" she asked as they ran. "Because you deserved the truth," Ragnar said. "I won't lie to you, Clara. Not about what I am. Not about what this costs." She squeezed his hand. "I don't see a monster." His step faltered for just a breath. "What do you see?" "A man who chooses when to kill," she said. "Not someone who kills because he can." They plunged deeper into the slums, where even the council's reach grew tenuous. The buildings here leaned against each other like drunks, and the streets narrowed to passages barely wide enough for 2 people. Laundry lines crisscrossed overhead like web. Eyes watched from shuttered windows, the lower packs, those without titles or territory, surviving on scraps. A child's scream cut through the night. Ragnar stopped. "Trap," he said quietly. "I know," Clara breathed. "They're using bait." Ragnar's jaw tightened. "They're using a child." He moved before Clara could stop him. The ambush was waiting in a collapsed warehouse. 15 elite hunters, the council's best killers, arrayed in perfect formation. And in the center a wolf child bound and terrified. "We heard you had a weakness for innocence," the lead hunter called. "Let's test it." Ragnar's response was silence. Then storm. Clara would remember it in fragments. Ragnar moving too fast to follow. Bones breaking. Men screaming. The hunters had expected the storm alpha from 3 years ago. Powerful but restrained, bound by honor and hesitation. They got something older. Something unleashed. When it ended, 14 hunters lay broken on the warehouse floor. The 15th ran, screaming warnings into the night. Ragnar cut the child's bonds with gentle hands, his voice soft as he murmured reassurance. The lower packs emerged from the shadows, dozens of them watching with wide eyes. An old woman stepped forward. "The Storm Alpha," she whispered. "They said you were broken." "They lied," Ragnar said simply. He looked at the gathered faces, the poor, the forgotten, the ones the council had ground beneath their boots. "Tell them what you saw here." "What should we tell them?" the woman asked. Ragnar's eyes blazed silver in the darkness. "Tell them the High Alpha lives." The whispers started before they'd even left the warehouse. By dawn the lower city would know. By noon the entire realm would hear. The Storm Alpha had returned. They are 2 against the world, fighting a system built on lies. If you are rooting for Ragnar and Clara to burn the corrupt council to the ground, show your support by liking this video. Let's show them the strength of our numbers. You can't go alone. Ragnar's voice was low, dangerous. They stood in a safe house deep in the slums. A single room with rotting floorboards and a window that overlooked the palace district. Dawn light painted the archives in the distance, a tower of white stone that held the realm's darkest secrets. "I can," Clara said, tying her hair back with practiced efficiency. "I have to. They'll execute you if they catch you. They'll execute me anyway." She met his storm-gray eyes without flinching. "The moment I stepped into that ceremony, I became a traitor. At least this way my death means something." Ragnar's jaw tightened. For 3 years he'd faced armies without fear. He'd endured humiliation, betrayal, exile, all without breaking. But the thought of Clara walking into danger alone made something in his chest crack. "Let me come with you," he said quietly. "You can't." Clara's voice gentled. "The Storm Alpha can't move through the city unnoticed. But a maid? I'm invisible, remember? I can get in, find the evidence, and get out before anyone knows I was there." "Clara." "I see you, Ragnar." She placed her hand over his heart. "You stood alone for 3 years because no one else would. Let me stand for you now." She was gone before he could stop her. The archives were a labyrinth of stone and secrets. Clara moved through them like smoke, her bare feet silent on cold floors. Her heart hammered but her hands stayed steady. She'd memorized the layout from Ragnar's description. 3rd floor, eastern wing. Records from the territorial purges. Guards patrolled the corridors. She melted into alcoves, pressed herself into shadows, became the ghost she'd always been. Invisible. Forgettable. Alive. The records room was locked. Clara picked it with a hairpin, her fingers nimble from years of palace service. Inside, rows of leather-bound volumes stretched into darkness. She lit a candle stub and began to search. Territorial Realignment Initiative. Northern Border. Authorized Purges. Her hands shook as she pulled the volumes from the shelves. Page after page of falsified trials. Fabricated crimes. Villages condemned for harboring insurgents who'd never existed. Children labeled as threats. Families executed for refusing to surrender land the council wanted. Her village. Her family. Her mother. All lies written in official ink. Clara stuffed documents into her servant's apron, her vision blurring with rage and grief. Decades of murder disguised as law. Hundreds of Ragnars, people who'd refused, who'd resisted, who'd been erased by ceremonies pretending to be justice. Stop! She froze. A guard stood in the doorway, sword drawn. Clara's mind raced. No weapons. No escape. No Ragnar to shield her. She was alone. Good, she thought. Let them see what an invisible girl can do. She threw the candle at the guard's face. He stumbled back, cursing. Clara bolted past him, the stolen documents clutched to her chest. Alarms rang. Boots thundered behind her. She ran like she'd run the night her village burned, desperate, terrified, alive. Ragnar paced the safe house like a caged wolf. She'd been gone 3 hours. Too long. Far too long. His hands trembled, not with rage but with fear. The kind of fear he hadn't felt since the night they'd betrayed him. Since the moment he'd realized he'd lost everything. He couldn't lose Clara. Not her. Somewhere in the chaos of the past days, she'd become more than an ally. More than the girl who dared to speak. She'd become his anchor. The thing that kept him from becoming the monster the council claimed he was. If she died because she'd stood for him. The door burst open. Clara stumbled through, breathless and bleeding from a cut on her arm, but alive. She held up the documents, her smile fierce. I got them, she gasped. All of it. Every crime. Every lie. Ragnar crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. His hands shook as they cradled her head. Don't do that again, he whispered into her hair. We both know that's a lie, she said. But she held him back just as tightly. By midday, copies of the documents flooded the lower city. By evening, they'd reached the merchant districts. By midnight, nobles were burning evidence in their own estates. But it was too late. The realm had seen the truth written in the council's own hand. The ceremonies, the trials, the purges, all lies. The high arbiter who'd condemned Ragnar Vale had condemned hundreds before him. And the Storm Alpha they'd called traitor had been the only one brave enough to refuse. The realm didn't just fracture. It shattered. Packs began to choose sides. Lower wolves rallied to Ragnar's name. Even some nobles, disgusted by the scope of the council's crimes, sent quiet messages of support. The council's authority, built on lies and maintained by fear, crumbled like ash in Clara's hands. And in a safe house in the slums, an alpha and a maid stood together, watching the city burn with the light of revolution. The council's response came at dawn. War horns echoed across the city as allied packs gathered in the palace square. Thousands of warriors in formation, their banners displaying noble crests that had profited from the council's lies. They're here to erase you, Clara said from the window. They've been trying for 3 years. Ragnar moved toward the door. This time they'll have to look me in the eye. You can't fight an army alone. I won't have to. The truth you stole is worth more than 1,000 warriors. The lower packs are already moving. His hand covered hers. But I need to end this. The council's power comes from fear and secrecy. I'm going to strip them of both. Then I'm coming with you. No. His voice was gentle but absolute. This time I need you to stay alive. Be my witness, Clara. One last time. He kissed her forehead and was gone. The council chamber doors exploded inward. Ragnar walked through alone, his storm-gray eyes sweeping the assembled nobles. The High Arbiter stood at the center, flanked by elite guards. But the air tasted wrong. Corrupted. Storm Alpha, the Arbiter said, his voice resonating with unnatural power. You've come to die. I've come for the truth. Tell them what you really are. The Arbiter's smile widened. What I am the law. I am order. You're a parasite. The temperature dropped. The Arbiter's form began to shift, bones cracking, muscles swelling, his robes tearing as something monstrous emerged. His eyes bled to solid black, fingers elongated into claws. I am a god, the Arbiter snarled, his voice layered with stolen power. For 30 years, I've fed on the authority of every Alpha I've condemned. Every ceremony, every execution. Their power became mine. And now I'll add yours to the feast. The nobles gasped. Even the guards stumbled backward. You see, Ragnar addressed the room. This is what you've been kneeling to. Not law. Not justice. A creature that feeds on stolen dominance. The corrupted Arbiter launched himself from the dais with inhuman speed. Ragnar met him mid-leap. The impact shattered the marble floor. Walls cracked. The foundations groaned under the weight of colliding powers. I am everything you could have been, the Arbiter roared. Unlimited power. No restraint. Ragnar's eyes blazed silver. You're everything I refused to become. The duel began. Two alphas, one corrupted by stolen authority, the other refined by restraint. The chamber became their arena, and every noble bore witness. The Storm Alpha had never been broken. He'd been waiting for this moment. The corrupted Arbiter moved with stolen strength, 30 years of consumed power in every strike. His claws carved trenches through marble. His roar shook the ceiling. Ragnar fought with precision. Every dodge calculated. Every strike targeted. He didn't match the Arbiter's savagery. He countered it with control. You're weak, the Arbiter screamed. You hold back. Yes, Ragnar said simply. He caught the Arbiter's wrist mid-strike. Twisted. Bone cracked. Ragnar swept his legs, drove him to the floor, and pressed his knee against the creature's spine. Restraint isn't weakness, Ragnar said, his voice carrying across the chamber. It's what separates power from tyranny. The Arbiter thrashed, but Ragnar's grip was absolute. He pressed harder, not to kill, but to break the stolen authority. Tell them, Ragnar commanded. Every ceremony you corrupted. Every trial you falsified. Every innocent you condemned. Never. Ragnar's alpha dominance flooded the chamber. Pure, undiluted, earned. Not stolen. Not corrupted. The Arbiter's resistance crumbled. The confession poured out. Names. Dates. Crimes spanning 3 decades. Nobles who'd paid for judgments. Families executed for their lands. Warriors condemned for refusing to become monsters. When it ended, the Arbiter lay broken. Not dead, but diminished. A withered old man who traded his soul for authority. Ragnar stood bloodied but unbroken. The silence was absolute. Then the nobles knelt. One by one they dropped to their knees. Guards. Advisors. Even elder nobles whose wealth came from corruption. Rise, High Alpha, Lord Corrigan said. The realm calls you home. Take your rightful place. High Alpha. Storm Alpha. Our Alpha. Clara watched from the doorway. This was everything they'd stolen from him 3 years ago. The power. The authority. The crown. All he had to do was take it. Ragnar looked at the kneeling nobles. At the broken Arbiter. At the throne that had corrupted so many. Then he walked toward Clara. The chanting faltered. Ragnar knelt before the maid in the doorway. The chamber went silent. Power without conscience created this world, Ragnar said, his eyes meeting Clara's. I've seen what happens when strength answers only to itself. I've watched authority devour those who wield it. He bowed his head. Rule with me or I walk away. Clara's breath caught. Every eye watched her. She looked at the alpha who'd endured humiliation rather than become a monster. The warrior who'd killed to protect but showed mercy to those who'd mocked him. Clara placed her hand on his head. I don't choose kings, she said clearly. I choose men who stand when it's easier to kneel. She pulled him to his feet. Rise with me. Not as alpha and servant. Not as ruler and subject. As partners who will remake this realm. Ragnar rose, Clara's hand in his. They turned together to face the chamber. The realm saw what history would remember. An alpha who knelt before conscience, and a maid who refused to let him kneel alone. 6 months later, the sacred hall stood rebuilt. The marble replaced. The pillars raised. But the chamber was different. Open archways where walls had been, letting light flow freely. No shadows for lies to hide in. Clara stood at the center, barefoot as always, but no longer invisible. She wore simple robes, not a crown. She'd refused it 3 times. I'm not a queen, she told Ragnar. I'm a voice. The moment I take a crown, I become part of the system we're trying to change. The merchant's petition has been heard, she announced to the assembled crowd. Not just nobles. Merchants, craftsmen, farmers, lower pack representatives stood among them. Their concerns about trade routes are valid. We'll negotiate. Ragnar stood beside her. Not on a throne above, but beside her on the same level. The northern border needs schools, he added. Not soldiers. We've sent teachers. The villages are rebuilding. The same villages the council had condemned. Now healing. Any other concerns? Clara asked. An old woman from the lower pack stepped forward. Will there be another ceremony? A coronation? No, Ragnar said firmly. No more ceremonies that measure worth by bloodline. No more rituals that separate wolves into worthy and worthless. Then how do we know who leads? Clara smiled. You choose. Every pack. Every district. You choose representatives who speak for you. If we fail you, you replace us. Shocked murmurs rippled through the hall. That's not how it's done, Lord Corrigan said. Alphas answer to everyone, Ragnar interrupted. Or they become tyrants. I learned that lesson kneeling on cold marble while you laughed. I won't forget it. The old woman smiled. The high alpha remembers he was once ignored. That's why we trust him. Clara looked around the rebuilt chamber. At faces once invisible, now standing openly. At nobles learning to listen. At a system slowly transforming into something that might resemble justice. This hall was meant to erase Ragnar Vale, Clara said quietly. It became the place the realm remembered him. I was meant to remain invisible. She met Ragnar's eyes. I became the voice history could not silence. Ragnar took her hand. Not as an alpha claiming possession. As a partner recognizing an equal. Clara became a voice history couldn't silence. If you want to be part of a community that values truth and storytelling just as much, join our family by hitting subscribe. Your voice matters here. Power unseen nearly destroyed this realm, he said. Power hoarded by those who feared losing it. Clara finished. Power guided by truth remade it. The hall erupted. Not in applause but in conversation. Debate. The messy sound of people learning to speak freely. Clara and Ragnar stood together, neither above nor below, but among their people. The ceremony that was meant to break them had become their beginning, and the realm slowly began to remember what it meant to be whole.